Warning: the following contains explicit language and subject matter that may not be suitable for younger listeners, church folk, and people who enjoy kale smoothies.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to A Pod Amongst Men. I'm your host, Steve B., and this is Coffee Break Conversations for the 21st Century. My guest today is Ray Freeman. He is a psychotherapist, and he's the director of the National Council of Psychotherapists based out of the UK. And he was kind enough to come on here and talk to us today about depression, most notably depression in men, you know, some of its causes, some of the way it manifests itself, some of the ways we could deal with it. Ray was very kind with his time. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope this is educational for everyone. I know it was for me. And yeah, that's it. Here's our conversation with Ray, or my conversation with Ray. Just disregard all the things I'm saying. This is Ray Freeman. Here it goes. Let him say it. First and foremost, I would like to say thank you for agreeing to do this, and taking up your free time on a Sunday.
Yeah. I get no invitations, and I got 2 in a week. And I did the other one on Tuesday we're also about depression with a lady who's Russian, but stuck in Vietnam in lockdown.
Oh my God.
But she runs a podcast for women about depression. So we did all of that. And then, so it was easier for me, although I'm known as a therapist for people that have come out of or are still in abusive relationships and narcissism and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Depression is a very big part of course, what I do, particularly with men.
So before we get into depression, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit of like who you are, where you're from, kind of like your personal story?
Okay. Well, we could be here all day, so I'll be brief. My name is Ray Freeman. I'm a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, and I also have a master's degree in cognitive behavior therapy. I've been a therapist for 20 odd years. And prior to that, I was a lecturer in psychology and mental health for some years at what we call colleges of further education, doing degree work. I did some university work as well, which is higher education. I'm come from London, East London, but I've lived in Yorkshire, which is at the other end of the country, almost 200 odd miles north. I've lived up here for probably 30 years now. Well, I live in a tiny little cottage, certainly by American standards, tiny cottage in a tiny village near Skipton in North Yorkshire. The cottage was built in 1890, so you can imagine it has some issues about age, but we like it. We bought it as a project and we like it. I'm married to Christine. We have 2 daughters, both grown up, one's married with 2 children. The other one is a single parent with 1 child. So I have 3 grandchildren. That's about it, really. I run the National Council of Psychotherapists, which also has an arm called the International Council of Psychotherapists. And it's a professional body because in the UK, particularly, everything is voluntary rather than compulsory. So we have lots of competition, but we're doing okay. That's okay. I do clinical work still, and I supervise, mentor other clinicians as well. And I could probably go on for another hour, but I won't.
All right, so I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
So I know you said you specialize in people coming out of toxic relationships, narcissism, that kind of stuff. But today we're going to kind of focus in on depression, specifically in men, since that is kind of the main demographic of this audience. Yeah. I would like to come back briefly at the end to talk a little bit about narcissism, because that is something that interests me. But for now, depression, especially in now in the year 2020, mental health has become much more of a commonplace conversation among people. It's not something that's brushed under the rug as much as it maybe used to be back in our youth. what would you say are some common signs of depression in men? You know, like what are some ways we can recognize that? Because I feel like that's almost like an invisible enemy unless you know the signs, you know?
Yeah. I think there is a general malaise about men's mental health, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I use men's mental health as one of the three pillars I specialize in the practice. It is changing. COVID is changing it. So maybe something apart from the new pandemic in mental health, which we're all going to get because of lockdown, maybe we're starting to talk more sensibly about men. There is a lot of symptoms, physical, social, psychological symptoms that are across the board. Men tend to do, they're not extra, they're instead of some of the things. If I can give you an idea.
Okay.
Women with depression blame themselves. Men with depression tend to blame others.
So we externalize it.
Yes, they tend to be angry, where women tend to be sad. Although sadness is a very big part of it in men too, men can also turn towards anger. They can turn towards paranoia. They are restless. They can become compulsive. The usual stuff about a disturbance of sleep and disturbance of food, what we call disturbance of food, either eating a lot more, eating a lot less. Those are pretty common across both sexes, but men tend to externalize more. They become more agitated. They're more likely to substance abuse, legal and illegal. They'll lose interest in their families and their hobbies, which is a big thing with men, isn't it? Hobbies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can see some swords in the back. So yeah, I know what your hobbies are.
They're all over. You're only seeing half of the garage too.
Oh,
There's a lot more on the other side.
Well, I can. Yeah, I'll start to imagine. I mean, I did a lot of martial arts when I was younger, but these days my hobby tends to be association football. It's football to me, soccer to you. But if you lose interest in those sorts of things, you lose interest. Losing interest in libido, your libido dropping can often be both. Well, often is both sexes, and medication has a part to play in that too, because sometimes the side effect of medication can be a loss of libido. But men tend to, if you think about men tend to externalize more than women. And if you think back of the way boys and men are brought up as opposed to women, girls and women, we are much more outward. This is what we're trained to do. We're trained to make our decisions, whereas women are trained to care more, where we're more interested in justice. Women are more interested in care, and that reflects in the depression symptoms.
That's something that we... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I would say that's something that I've talked about a lot on the show in terms of the way, men, boys versus girls are raised, and what we as society kind of deem, male or masculine or feminine emotions or, forms of expression. I feel like but it would seem that the box that we would associate with feminine emotions is much bigger and much more, it involves a lot more different things, whereas with men it's much smaller. It's like you're allowed to show anger and sadness at a funeral, and those are the two things, and it's it's almost like we're not given another choice but to externalize. We're only allowed to show anger, and that's the only way we know how to express anything, really.
Yes.
I'm sorry to cut you off on that.
That's okay.
So, like, how early do people kind of see these signs? I mean, is it something that you could spot, in a child or a teenager? Like, how far back do these behaviors kind of go?
Depression, certainly in the UK, is one of the easiest diagnoses of all. And it actually comes from the APA, the American Psychological Association manual, which we use in the UK as well, because it takes so long to write it. We don't want to do our own. We use yours. And the diagnosis for an acute depressive episode, something that is of fast onset, is no more than 2 weeks, which is almost unheard of across the rest of mental health. It can be 6 months, it can be 2 years in other disorders, but in depression, it's 2 weeks diagnosis. So if you are feeling the one thing that has to be present among all the other potential symptoms is low mood and sadness. So men will often hide that, certainly the sadness, but they won't be able to hide the low mood. So, for example, if someone, male or female, goes to their GP in the UK, it can take you a few days to get an appointment, certainly these days. The GP might consider that that's been like that for the last week. It doesn't look like it's going to change in the next week. So they will start the process of diagnosis of that, likely to be depression. You're likely to come out with medication. And go on a list of some kind for National Health Service talking therapy of one kind. And that's almost unheard of because of there's no money in the NHS. So it's down to the private people like myself. And there are thousands of us working that way. So 2 weeks. With men, it's likely to be more difficult because they're less likely to go to the GP and suffer for 6 months before someone actually says to them, if you don't, my wife might say, if you don't go to the doctor tomorrow, I'm leaving.
Yeah, we literally have to be forced into self-care, it seems.
Very often, yeah. I think it's changing. I think your generation, I think I'm older than you, looks like. Not much.
I got a few grays. I'm right there.
Well, I haven't shaved today either.
Yeah.
So yeah, your younger generation of men, the 19 to 45-year-olds now are more likely to demonstrate and show their feelings than my generation.
Well, definitely. I mean, it definitely seems like people in my generation today are much more open and allow themselves to show vulnerability. Whereas, before, I know, my parents' generation, that was looked down upon. It's like, really, come on, nobody wants to hear that. You got to go support your family, go to work, shut up, watch the football game, right. And that's it. But it definitely seems like that's being
famous for a stiff upper lip, aren't they? So you're quite right. But unfortunately, it is changing.
Definitely. It definitely seems like it's being normalized, especially, in the media and with, celebrities and big personalities.
Absolutely. And even royalty over here. Yeah. Prince William and we don't talk about Prince Harry much now. But certainly Prince William, along with a lot of sportsmen and those sorts of, they're now we're talking, which is at last.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thing, and I think you're right. As we see more people do it, it kind of opens the door for more people to step forward. Absolutely, and kind of break open the levees.
It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Definitely.
I think actually this virus is accelerating it.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely be going stir crazy, sitting in your house for all this time, not being able to work. It'll bring the issues out. It'll bring them to the forefront.
Yeah, well, that's what it's doing, isn't it?
Absolutely. So what do you think are some root causes of depression in men? Whether it be it trauma or actual mental illness.
Depends on which model of mental health you adhere to.
Okay.
A doctor, medical doctors, will adhere to what's called the medical model of ill health. So they'll talk about a malfunction in the neurotransmitters in their brain, and that's eminently true. In depression, there is changes in the chemicals in your brain, particularly serotonin, and so there is changes. I'm a psychotherapist. I adhere to the psychological theory of mental health, and that is that something happens to create the issue. We can go down this route, and if you like, and talk about the difference between mind and brain.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
But that's way complex.
Okay.
For me, depression is either a medical disease caused by a neurochemical, brain chemical, or hormonal imbalance, or it's created by certain styles of thinking. I think if you ever come across people that you can't be bothered with because they're so negative about everything.
Oh yeah, I work with quite a few of them.
Yeah, me too. Too many. So yeah, that's true. And the third possible cause is a result of an unfortunate experience, trauma of some kind. To me, I will add that depression is all about loss. So it might be a very tiny loss, like the loss of something you treasured in your house, and you can't find it, but you know it's in the house. That would link to previous losses in your head that you may even have forgotten about. And they would even be what we would call from a subconscious place, and I would say unconscious, but subconscious place, way back into childhood. So by the time they multiply and link together, that becomes the change that causes the change in the brain chemicals.
Okay.
If you think about the medical model, your brain has to anticipate when there's going to be a trauma of some kind so it can change the chemical structure. I think it's the other way around. I think something happens that creates the change in chemical structure. So there can also be hormones, not so much in men, but certainly in women. And it could be certain styles of thinking. I do know, I could give you examples of men that I've known that I've always thought to myself, what a miserable so-and-so. And I've not wanted to be in their company that often, that I've seen go down a slippery slope of mental health, use it with substance abuse, alcohol usually, and become worse and worse until everything is lost.
Yeah.
So I think it can come from anywhere, and probably does.
So when you say like a certain way of thinking, like how does that happen? You know, how does that happen, and how do you change that? Is that because is that something that you're born with, or something that you develop over time?
Well, you know, I always think of the mind as something like a piece of software that you write on with experience. So there has to be the basis, which I suppose, if you like, is the genome. It is your, that's what you're set with.
Kind of like written into your
Depending
DNA.
on experiences. But you see, what happens is during childhood, usually before the age of 9, 10, 11, we create a thought process, a set of rules that we live by. Now that will, and it's what we call the triad. It's about yourself, the world, and your future. And if there is something wrong, a child can pick up something like a parent that tells them off once too often, ignores them once, spends days it can be anything. But if that child picks that up, that becomes a dysfunctional belief about themselves. Those dysfunctional beliefs create the rules that you want to live by. So supposing a child lacks attention, so they feel that they lack attention. They may feel they lack attention because they aren't good enough to grab the attention of their parents. Where it may be nothing of the sort. It might be that they're just busy, or don't give them enough time. We don't know. But by that, they may think that they have to make sure everybody likes them. Otherwise, no, they're going to be ignored again. So that dysfunctional belief creates a rule that they live by. That person might never say no to anybody. Even when they want to say no, they'll say yes. That make sense?
Absolutely. And any fathers out there listening should be put on notice right now. Like, be present for your kids, because that attention-seeking behavior can lead to some slippery slopes.
I have to say, with the best will in the world, you can be as as great as you can be as a father, you will still screw your children up.
Yeah, that's
because they do. My parents were fantastic people, but we all have our own little foibles, don't we? So
absolutely.
So I had a great childhood, but I still have my little ways, and most of the time it doesn't create illness, it doesn't create problems. It just what makes us unique to each other.
Our own little quirks that we all have.
Exactly.
Well, that's definitely something that myself and a lot of other people are guilty of, is even holding ourselves to impossible standards, because like you said, nobody's going to be the perfect parent. Your kid is going to have something going on no matter what you do. So you just got to do the best you can. And that's something that I've always struggled with. My son is 9 right now. So, you're saying all this stuff, and I'm just thinking, just last night, I'm trying to work on something for the podcast, and he keeps, hey, Dad, watch this. Dad, look at this. Dad, look at this. And, all right, listen, buddy, you got to give me 5 minutes here. And he's trying to, and he get kind of worn down after a while because, kids just have this boundless energy. And, eventually it's like, buddy, I can't watch this YouTube video with you anymore. Like, I'm trying to do this before it's too late. So, and now, I go to bed feeling guilty. I'm like, this poor kid's going to think his father doesn't love him. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's a circle that happens. But, so something interesting, since we're talking specifically about men, all these different signs of depression, with the state of affairs in the world today, it seems, tensions are high. Maybe it's just the way we perceive it based on the way it's presented to us through the media and social media and all these other sources. But it definitely seems like there's a lot more anger and aggression out there. And at the same time, with the way the pandemic has kind of shaken out, is you see a lot more people lonely. They're dealing with loss, whether it's the loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of income, all these other things. Do you think that there's maybe a direct connection, or at the very least a correlation between, the heightened tensions with the people throughout the world, most notably here in the U.S., and depression? Like, do you see that? Is there being a connection there, or is it kind of just a correlation without causality?
Well, I think certainly there has to be a correlation of somewhere. I don't think there's a cause and effect. I think the problems we're finding with this vitriolic picking up of sides, and I know you've got your election in, what is it, in 3 weeks?
It's not even, it's just under a month now.
Yeah, God help you.
Can't come soon enough. Good Lord.
My feeling is that it's got more to do with group status than it has. I'm sure there must be a correlation between a rise in depressive episodes in men and women because of COVID, and because of being locked down, or because of resistance to being locked down, because there seems to be too much of that around. That's why we've still got the damn thing. I feel like it's more to do with in-group, out-group.
Tribalism.
In times of trouble, they polarize even more. You'll always find in-group, out-group, whether it's a family group or extended family group, or your political party, or your religion, or your country. There'll always be in-group, out-group. But I think what happens in times of trouble, like a pandemic, I think that polarizes. And I think it's more likely to cause aggression than depression. I think it's more allied to anxiety than it is to depression.
Okay. What would you how would you describe the difference between the two things, between anxiety and depression? Because I think a lot of people might be a little hazy on that.
Okay. It's very simple. If you think about depression as a rucksack on your back,
okay,
it's about past losses. But depression is always about the past. So whether it's a current loss, but it's linked to previous losses.
Okay.
So I always think about it in terms of a rucksack on your back.
A backpack to any Yankees out there listening.
Okay. Anxiety is about the future. Anxiety is an irrational process of fear created by the perception of danger in the future. So you get anxious. Anxiety is the simplest and it's the most common anxiety. It's the most common mental health disorder, and it can lead to chronic illness later in life. But anxiety is essentially a two-way street between you and your environment. If you're worried about the future, the only thing that will cure the anxiety is to stop worrying. You stop worrying, it goes away. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Anxiety can develop as well. It can be from nothing at all to obsessive compulsive disorder, where you have to perform tasks to save something, save yourself, save your family.
I have to have all my shoes pointing exactly southeast.
Partly.
Otherwise, the goblins will come out of the ground and kill everyone.
That's not necessarily OCD.
Yeah.
That would be something that in Freudian terms we would call anal retentive. So you like to be neat and tidy. When you were potty trained, and then there's part of your life that was neat and tidy. But OCD goes far further than that.
Okay.
You have to stir your coffee so many times, otherwise something disastrous will happen.
Yeah. I feel like that kind of gets made into a joke a lot of times when we see it.
Yeah, it is a joke, but if you try treating it, it's no joke.
Yeah, that's the thing. We kind of laugh it off.
Disorder. And it has a vast array of symptoms that can vary from. So the treatment is always for the individual as opposed to any set format. So that's the difference.
Okay.
Anxiety is the future.
Depression is the past. All right, that's pretty simple. I think if you can't get that, then I can't believe you found this podcast. So, how much is this depression and anxiety, for that matter? Is any of this genetic? Like, is it possible, like, you know, your one of your parents struggled with it, and you could kind of inherit it, or is it, you know, how much is environment versus?
There's always arguments about this.
Okay.
My argument is always against genetic. It's possible. There was some research done in the 1970s where there's a 0.957 correlation with identical twins. So you've got a 0.957 chance against one. If one has it, the other will get it. If it was genetic, identical twins have identical genetic makeup. My argument would be it has to be 100%. If one gets it, the other will, because the genetics are the same.
Gotcha.
So there must be some other factors in there within the genetic system. So my feeling is if it's less than 100% correlation, we don't use percent for correlation, do we? If it's one, if the correlation is 1, then they're going to get it. If it's less than 1, there must be other factors. And maybe those other factors contribute to what I would call learned behavior. If you grow up in an environment where your mother is severely depressed, one of your twin might get depressed because the mother's taught them how to behave, how to think, and you have too. So you are likely to get it, but it's not genetics.
Gotcha.
It might be, and it must contribute. What I love about psychology is you can't be wrong. You can be you can be right in so many different ways, and I really like that. This is why I studied psychology as opposed to maths or anything else, because science, you can be wrong, but in psychology you can always have that argument.
Well, it's great. There's no clean cut answers.
There's no clean cut.
Nothing's definitive, truly.
And I find that fantastic about it. Because I can sit here and pontificate, and someone will listen to this when it's published, and they'll go, "That's a load of old rubbish." They may even contact me and say, "You're rubbish," but that's what the value of psychology is all about. You can't be wrong. Well, you can, but
Well,
you can be more right than you can be wrong.
I love that, actually. That's a great way of looking at
Yeah,
it.
me too. That's why I fell in love with it. That and Freud.
Um, so what are some ways that, everybody says, oh, stress is a killer, it can do all this to you. But as far as depression and anxiety, there are ways that it can, symptoms and effects can manifest physically in people, right?
Yeah.
So what are some different ways, because a lot of people maybe don't think about that in terms of just being sad, but
Well, but yeah, I mean, we're all sad, aren't we? Sometimes it doesn't, like if the death of somebody in the family or it's sad. I'm going to get on to the ways in that what you asked me, but I want to talk first about the end result of suicide.
okay.
Because more men commit suicide than women do by miles.
Yeah, isn't it like 75% of suicides are men?
Something like that. I've got the figures here for the UK. I looked them up just before we started this, because I only had them vaguely in my head. There is an argument that men choose less reversible methods, and I would accept that.
Sounds right.
We tend to be more clear cut about it. But in the UK in 2019, there was 5,691 suicides, but only 1,388 of them were women, 4,303 men. That's more than 3 times the amount.
Yeah, staggering, really.
It is staggering, and to finish the stats, men aged 45 to 49 are the highest risk, but there's also a rise in the suicide rates among young people, and that trend carried on in 2019. That is still rising. So we are on the edge of the abyss here in terms of suicide, and we must do something about looking after men better.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I know men account for a much higher percentage of suicides, do they account for a higher percentage of patients with depression and anxiety, or
not necessarily? More women declare themselves depressed than men do. Men are less likely to go to the doctor for longer, whereas
Definitely.
women, being more caring, they're more open than men are, and they're more likely to share their feelings with friends and then the doctor over here, we call the GP.
that goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, is that women it's much more socially acceptable for women to show vulnerability than men. So like
It's almost
said,
expected. When I used to work in the universities, you have a group of 20, and if the class, could say to the class, let's be honest, how many of you are on antidepressants? There'd be at least 5 hands go up, if not 6.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be lots of people are more. It's the common cold of mental illness, depression. And it's 1 in 4 people will get depression at least once in their lifetime.
Pretty high number considering the amount of people out there.
It's 25. Well, I mean, even the UK, we're 66 million. That means, there's like 15, 16, 17 million people depressed at any given time on medication.
1 out of every 4 people.
Think of the cost of the country. I've got no clue about the figures in America. But...
Well, our healthcare system isn't exactly,
Well, ours is struggling. Well, I think everybody's struggling at the moment, aren't they? You asked me, but you asked me a question. I took you off onto suicide. Long-term illness, yes. Of course, the prime age for coronary heart disease in men is 49 to 52, regardless of the country, whether it's US or the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Coronary heart disease, cardiovascular disease, adrenal problems, because your body is pumped your adrenal glands overwork, and over a number of years that can become an exhaustion. Of course, we would die without adrenaline in our system, because that's our motivation. And of course, noradrenaline is the only chemical that's in our bloodstream and in our brains. I think you call it norepinephrine, and we call it noradrenaline, but it's the same substance. That's a hormone, but it's also a neurotransmitter.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's lots of disease. A lot of it comes down to personality type, which feeds back into the dysfunctional belief system that you've had, but it also comes into motivation. The original research was done in the 60s or 70s in America, where they were doctors tracking coronary heart disease. And they decided to go back 5 years later because they realized most of the people with it, most of the men with it, were industry moguls of one kind or another, big businessmen or not so much, but in business, putting pressure on themselves. And when they went back 5 years later, so many of them had died that they suddenly realized that there was something going on here. And then they did the research and came up with something called a type A personality, which is that self-driven. But that comes from childhood. And I'm one of them. I had a heart attack 18 years ago because I was a type A, and I'm now not. I mean, I run a business, but now I take time for myself, and I'm more balanced with type B, which is a bit more laid back.
Just quickly, could you kind of explain what a type A personality is for anybody who doesn't already know?
Yeah, it's someone that's self-driven. A lot of us are, but the fact that you're self-driven doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go down the coronary heart disease route. It depends on the rest of your lifestyle. If you're the sort of person that works 60 hours a week, driven to run your business, you can't do that for long.
Yeah,
you get away with it for 5 years or 10 years, but somewhere along the line, if you keep you're chasing the future, and if you don't look after your wellness while you're doing it, you'll have to look after your illness, because that's what will happen.
absolutely.
Our bodies are not designed to be that driven, whereas I can be pretty laid back these days. I learned my lesson, and I'm pretty laid back with that because I take my time to enjoy life.
Well, it's good. A lot of people don't learn that lesson, unfortunately, and end up having to repeat that same process.
Yeah, that's right. I recovered, and recovered very well, and I'm still fit and healthy. I'm a bit overweight, but I'm still healthy.
It's a pandemic, we all are.
I'm 2 stone heavy than I want to be. That's 28 pounds. And before the pandemic, before the lockdown here in the third week in March, I'd lost a stone. I do yoga, but I do like vinyasa, which is quite fast. So it's an aerobic workout as well as a strength thing. And I just planned with my yoga teacher to do 3 classes a week. And then lockdown came. And instead of losing the other stone, I put the first one back on.
Yeah, I just started running again, actually yesterday. And I got some serious cobwebs to shake off, because since the pandemic started, I really haven't done anything. I was running before that, but I was also eating like a fool.
Oh yeah.
So now
if you could do 4 or 5 miles a day, then you can eat what you like.
Yeah, but 4 or 5 miles a day, and on top of working a job in construction,
it's
kind of
wouldn't do that, would you?
It's
so
a
you
tall
have a
order.
That's a physical job. That should help you keep trim.
It's funny because it is a physical job at times, but I mean, you are moving around, physically, not staying, stationary all day. But it's, I don't know. I went from being very much in shape, working out very consistently, being very disciplined, to just kind of, almost letting the wheels fall off, for lack of a better term. So I'm really trying to get that back right now, and we're allowed to run outside, so I'm just going to do that. And and hopefully I can stick with it as long as I can get past the initial soreness that I'm dealing with at the moment.
Yeah,
So,
I understand.
lastly, related to depression, which
Mhm.
the most important part is treatment. How do we remedy
Okay.
this terrible affliction?
There's lots of discussion amongst psychotherapists about medication. I'm one of these people that are in favor of medication. Um, it's not going to cure the depression, but what it will do is it could, at best, mask up to 70% of the symptoms. And what that does is it makes people more functional. The research tells us that the best cure for depression, for an acute depressive episode, is a dual approach: talking cure and medication. And this is the way I have always looked at it. When I see a new client, I look at a dual approach. Firstly, how do we reduce the pain they're in and reduce that and increase their functionality? Mm-hmm. Because I want to deal with the causes, but I want them more functional to deal with those causes. So if they're sitting at home or laying in bed or sitting in the corner of the room with their knees up to their chest because they can't cope, medication will help them and get them washed and dressed in the morning, and maybe even get them back to work. And at best, it'll be 70% better. They'll feel 70% better after 3, 4, 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. Then I'm better able to help them deal with the causes of the depression. And of course, there's never single. It may be that someone says, oh, my partner died or whatever, somebody died. That may be the trigger. But if you remember, I've said it's about your losses in the past, amalgamate. A prime example is myself. 20 years ago now, more than 20 years ago, my mother died. And I was the psychologist of the family. I had to support everybody. Mm-hmm. And they were all down in London and I'm up here in Yorkshire. So it's like a 4-hour journey either way. And I didn't mourn particularly. I was looking after my father and my sister and the rest of the family. And I didn't mourn at all. But about 6 months later, my dog died, age 6. And he'd only been with us 4 years because he was a stud dog and we rescued him because it was a good kennel and and I was absolutely inconsolable. And I was in therapy at the time because I was studying something that demanded I have some therapy. And my therapist at the time said, well, it's obvious to you. It should be obvious to you. You're a psychologist. That the past losses are adding to the current loss, and that was true. So this is how it works. We cannot escape the losses of the past. We can bury them, but there will be a trigger, and that pathogenic idea of loss will come up and mix with the current loss.
Well, it seems like that if you take what you just said. The amalgam of past losses and how for your example about what happened to you, if you actually if you look back on your life and people and experiences, I feel like we can all see that. You see somebody like, oh, they're watching a movie and all of a sudden like they're just bawling, crying. It's like, all right, the movie's not that sad, but they're actually experiencing something from the past and it's manifesting right now in this in this time, and like they're not crying because of the movie, they're crying about what happened 5 years ago. And like we could all see that, and just personally I could think of 3 examples of that exact thing. So I think that's very easy to spot if you actually know what you're looking for. So it's
of course often, though, you're quite right, but often losses are hidden because they're too our conscious mind can't deal with them, so we defend them into our unconscious mind, and we put barriers there that we call defense mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes they are taken unawares. And it's really quite funny. I can remember years ago, I was training in hypnotherapy, and we had to do a count back. It was a sort of a training to be into regression. And we had to get our subject to lift their finger whenever there was a trauma as we counted back their age. So I go into the trance, and I don't know my fingers moving, but the woman I'm working with is counting back. And when she brought me out at the end, she said, I'm going to list them for you. And she went, and I went, before you do, I'll tell you what they are. And I named 8 different. And she went, yeah, they're all there except you've missed one. And I went, oh, no, I don't think so. She went, yes, 9. So something happened when I was 9 that I can't even remember that affected me in terms of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no clue what it is. I think I'm pretty straightforward sort of chap. So I don't need to find out, because I don't think it's harming me. It's any pathogens from it. So it's either very well buried, or it probably wasn't as bad as my finger at the time.
But isn't that funny that we can have a scar, like an emotional or mental scar from something, and
Mm-hmm.
not even recognize what that event that precipitated that was. These things, like, we don't allow ourselves to feel in the moment, and
That's
then
right.
we end up carrying these things unconsciously for our entire lives. And I found, like, since I've been married, me and my wife, we make a point to talk and just communicate, and no matter what we're feeling, and we talk everything out just in having conversations. Like, looking back at the way I was raised, even little things that I didn't realize affected me at the time, and I realized that kind of colors my whole perspective on parenthood now. And maybe I didn't react well to that, and maybe that's not healthy to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's just, being able to talk about those things sometimes uncovers things that we didn't realize were kind of pitfalls and were even holding us back in one way or another.
Mm. It's funny how that you learn those things as a child. And the reason you learn them as a child is because the one thing we're equipped with, apart from being able to attract the attention of adults, is as we grow, we continue to grab the attention of adults because of survival.
Mm-hmm.
So if that is deprived or damaged in any way, that attention seeking, that's what causes the changes. And it depends on how I've known a young woman who was, as a child, she did ballet and all that. Lots of girls do that, I'm sure. Yeah. And somebody commented to her, somebody commented to her that she was getting a bit of a big girl to wear that leotard, because I suppose at the time she was just beginning to turn into a young woman. She came to me with eating problems, and that's what manifests.
Yeah, just a throwaway comment like that can have serious
One
repercussions.
throwaway comment can damage a person for years, and we don't know. That's why I say it doesn't matter how good you try and be with your kids. You'll say one thing, 2 things, 20 things that will harm them. And they have to, and it may be that that's what just makes them unique,
Mm-hmm.
but it may also be pathogen to create illness when they're older.
It's funny, coming from an Italian upbringing, like that was just kind of how we talk to one another. We rip on each other, say, hey, Richard Simmons, you want to stop spinning around, come over here and take your vitamins, or, something like that. But then we internalize those things and don't even realize
Absolutely,
it.
you do.
And like you said, it could be one thing. We could just brush it off, but you never know how that's going to affect a person. It's kind of scary. It's kind of funny. It's just it's it's something we should be aware of. But like you said, you can't be perfect all the time.
You don't know what perfect is. That's the whole point. You just, parents do their best. I'm sure, my parents, and lovely as they were, bless them, they must have screwed up something.
Mm-hmm.
What was this thing about 9? I don't know what that was. Maybe it was something that happened in a family. I have no clue. And my sister and I are very, very different people. She's in her 70s now, bless her. And she's very different to me. Mm-hmm. We better into the country. So it's WhatsApp most of the time, or that's how we don't get to see each other that often. But we're very different people, and we always were. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting a message that I've got an unstable connection.
Yeah, you cut out for a second there, but you seem.
Did I? Probably was a load of rubbish anyway. So,
I actually have 6 sisters, and we're all very different people. It's funny how 2 people can be raised in the same house and be
absolutely
night and day. And sometimes even oil and vinegar, where we just butt heads constantly.
Yeah. Well, my sister and I did for years, and then we didn't speak for a long time. But more recently, we've last 4 or 5 years we have.
I have the same exact thing. Sometimes my behavior is not the healthiest, I think, in terms of avoidance or just kind of like I find I can be very focused on certain things and not on others. And that's just what you're saying. I'm still busy, although I could retire. I don't, because I love what I do. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really busy, and I can work 40, 45, 50 hours a week, but then other times I'll take 2 days off, and then but I can be very focused. So my phone is sitting next to me here, but it's on silent, and it's turned away from me, so that I don't see the screen out of my peripheral vision, because there'll be people nagging me. Yeah.
What I mean is contacting me, and I'm saying nagging me.
Yeah. I have my phone facing me right now because my notes are there, and I'm still seeing the messages pop up. Whether it's an email or my wife asking me if I want anything from the sandwich shop. It's it's kind of it's difficult to focus.
You're 5 hours behind.
Yeah, right now it's 10:42 here.
Yeah.
So luckily I'm an early riser. But
okay.
So the last thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was going to say, what next?
The last thing regarding depression would just be: are there any daily practices or kind of learned behaviors that we can do ourselves to kind of stave this off and be mindful and kind of prepare ourselves?
One of the things is endorphins. The more endorphins you create, regular exercise, that sort of thing, the less I've got to say, depression can hit anybody, rich, mm-hmm. poor, fit, unfit, anybody. We have whole group showing out now from professional footballers. They earn hundreds of thousands of pounds a week, but they're depressed. By the same token, I'm just taken on a new client. It was a young lady that I taught years ago, and she approached me for help. And she's in a refuge in the north of England because of an abusive relationship, and she's got a young baby, and has no money at all. She's also depressed. So it can catch anybody. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there are predispositions, but because I'm one of those people that I would probably laugh rather than get sad, probably because I don't take things seriously enough, or I'm actually indifferent to an awful lot of things.
Or that could just be your own defense mechanism.
Well, it could be my defense mechanism too, but it's worked so far. Being healthy is what counts. If you live on bad food, fast food, burgers and processed meat, then you are more likely to be damaging yourself, because there are people, what I call the food police, that will say, if you're not eating something healthy, you're eating something that will kill you. I don't necessarily subscribe to that whole thing, but yes,
extreme.
I think you've got to be sensible about your body, because your brain is not just in your head. And this is something that there's lots of discussion about at the moment. And I go with what we call a three-brain model: here, and your gut. And there is more serotonin, which is a feel-good chemical in your brain that is affected by depression. More of that is produced in your gut than in your brain. So when you follow your gut instinct, you've thought it through, really, but you just don't realize that. So serotonin is really important. Obviously, your heart is. I felt when I had the heart attack that I suffered from a broken heart. It was physically broken, but my personality changed for quite a while. I got a lot more emotional about all sorts of things that I never did before. Janis Joplin's song would bring me to tears, it was something like Me and Bobby McGee or something like that, or even some Rolling Stone stuff, which I've grown up with. It's changed. My personality has recovered most of where I was, but I'm still much more emotional, much more suffer from a broken heart than I did before the heart attack. Even recently, we watched a film yesterday. Have you seen it?
Oh, the one with the guy who sings the Beatles songs.
Yeah. The point where John Lennon turns out, that was it. I couldn't hold that in, because that's my era. So yeah, that can be quite emotional, but which never was before. I was indifferent to an awful lot more stuff, but very driven, but not so driven, but more. So yeah, our gut produces, our heart does, and so does our brain. So another theory called the 7 brain theory, which I think is stretching it a bit, but that coincides.
Oh, might have lost you there. And we're frozen.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. You're back.
Okay. So living a better life, better food, fresh food, exercise, don't overdo the alcohol. That's the best way to live.
I think it's pretty
You're
easy.
less likely to be depressed.
That's the one thing that... I'm sorry.
If you're and if there is a trauma coming your way, it won't necessarily rescue you, but it might mitigate if you look after yourself better.
Definitely. Well, we're actually we're coming up on time right now. I think this might be a good place to put a pin in it. I was going to ask a little bit about the narcissism and the gaslighting stuff, but we might be able to save that for another episode if
I don't mind
if you'd
doing
be
that.
willing. All right. So thank you very much for sharing your immense wealth of knowledge with us, Ray. Do you want to tell the listeners where they could find you, where they could hear more from you?
I'm because of COVID and working online. I work from my home in North Yorkshire. Sorry, my office is West Yorkshire. You can find me on rayfreemanpsychotherapy.com, or you can find me on Instagram, Ray Freeman Psychotherapy, or even on Facebook or LinkedIn. You, Steve, found me on Instagram.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to make sure I put all the links on here, so any of the viewers
and
can find
you can find me through the website, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm on all of them. But like I say, my website is, I'm quite pleased with it.
Excellent.
So it's there. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Ray. I
you very
appreciate
much.
the time you've given us.
I'm quite comfy doing another one if you want to talk about narcissists.
I would love to. That's it. That's the conversation. Big thanks to Ray. Make sure you guys look him up on Instagram and Facebook and go to his website. If you didn't already see the links I put up here, I'll make sure I put the links in the show notes. So big thanks to him. Hopefully we can get him back on here again. I got a lot of stuff I want to talk to him about. As always, you guys know where to find us, APodAmongstMen on Instagram and Twitter. If you can watch the full video on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, please. Thank you. Subscribe and like. It helps us. We need to boost ourselves in the algorithms. If you have any long questions or anything you want to ask me personally, you could DM me or you could send an email, APodAmongstMen@gmail.com. And most importantly, please make sure to buy a sticker and support the podcast. Since we don't do Patreon, this is the way I can kind of fund some of the stuff for the show, make some upgrades, try to give you guys better content overall. So that's one of the ways you can help out and, show some love if you like what we're all about here. That's a nice way. Stick those stickers in your hard hat. Rashad put one on his car, which I was not expecting, but shout out to him. It's a good one. Or like Drew, you can put it on your chainsaw. Pretty cool. That's it, guys. See you next week. Peace.